and welcome to this review of my Razer Ornata Chroma keyboard. I've been wanting to review an Ornata for ages, and after I more or less burnt the 2014 model Black Widow to the ground in a previous video, I've had heaps of requests to do one of these, and now someone donated one to me so I can finally dive into one. Thanks, mate. The Ornata is possibly the most well-known so-called Mecha-Membrane keyboard on the market right now. Now, what the fuck does Mecha-Membrane mean? I guess they mean it's mechanical except with a membrane. I really need to make a video about what mechanical is, I think, because this sort of terminology isn't helping anyone. Believe it or not, I have several vintage Mecha-Membrane keyboards too. Yeah, that's actually a thing, such as this Copam keyboard, as well as an old gear-badged Tai-Hao clicker, and both of those are absolute terror fuck shit, so if I'm honest, I wasn't expecting much for this Razer keyboard either. But I'll admit, when I got it, I was surprised to find that the switches felt a lot better than I had anticipated. Not perfect, don't get me wrong, or even great, but not the hateful, malevolent shambles I had expected either. The key feel is, for instance, actually pretty damn tactile, which is not easy to find on keyboards nowadays. In fact, even their own Razer green clicky switches aren't really tactile, they're basically just noisy linears, so this is already an improvement right there. Now, it's not very refined and it has some disadvantages, as we'll see later, but you know, at first glance, it's not the infernal abomination spawn of Satan type train wreck I'd thought it might be. So let's look at the switch in a bit more detail. You know, what exactly does this Mecha-Membrane switch consist of? Well, simply put, it is a rubber dome switch with a built-in clicker mechanism in the form of a small leaf spring. Now, at first I thought that the clicker was based off of the rather similar-looking leaf spring clicker in Alps SKCM switches, which would be quite promising as the leaf springs in these switches generate a very nice type of tactility. Other Mecha-Membrane switches, such as the aforementioned Copam and Tai-Hao boards, and even Acer switches, use a very similar leaf spring to Alps, so it's certainly not a new concept. But one thing really confused me, which is the presence of the rubber domes in the switches. None of the other switches use those because the leaf springs already generate the tactility, so why would you still need rubber domes? Well, when I looked at the switch in detail, I figured it out, and this GIF I found somewhere confirms my suspicions. The leaf spring in Razer Mecha-Membrane switches doesn't actually generate tactility. See, the way it works in Alps is that the slider is hooked into the leaf spring, and when you press it, it pulls on the spring, pulling it forward, and at some point it releases, generating the tactile event, and the leaf spring slamming against the back of the housing is what makes the clicky noise. But as you can see, although the leaf spring in Razer Mecha-Membrane is kinked, it's not toothed like all the other leaves, so it can't hook into the slider, and moreover it's held in place in the slider well, so it can't slam into the housing. Instead, the leaf is just a clicker, which it does by slamming against the slider when it clears this little pip. It doesn't add to the tactility at all, it's just a clicker. So where does all this tactility come from? Well, taking out a leaf spring to test it confirms the truth. They're not so tactile because of the leaves, but because they just went with really, really tactile rubber domes. Aha! So when they go on their website about generating a crisp tactile click, I don't know how a sound such as a click can produce a feel like tactility, by the way, but whatever they're trying to convey, the clicker does not generate tactility. So now we get to the switch's drawbacks, and one of the biggest is that the switches are extremely inconsistent, with some feeling much more tactile than others after just a few days of me using it, and to be honest, I have no idea what's causing that. The inconsistency is so bad that it's actually audible as well. Listen to the variation in clicky noise between some of the switches. This is indefensible. The switches are also very mushy, which shouldn't come as a surprise, seeing how they're really just rubber domes, but still, it's remarkable. Again, you can actually hear it even. If you listen very closely, when I press a key, you can actually hear the rubber mat squish out over and then rip off of the membranes underneath. Sounds gross. I've thought about how best to describe this level of mushiness, and the best I can come up with is that the switch doesn't actually feel like it bottoms out. It feels like it's still not there when you press it all the way down. So does it feel better than MX Blue, I hear you wonder? Well, the incredible inconsistency of the switches alone prevents this in my opinion, and the mushiness certainly doesn't help. In fact, when you try them out next to each other, you really start to appreciate the positivity of a firm bottom-out feel. It feels like you've accomplished something, so to speak, and in this respect MX Blue is infinitely better. The tactility is actually stronger on the Razer switches because of the domes they went with, but with the huge inconsistencies in key feel it's difficult to fully appreciate it, and MX Blue feels sharper, crisper and smoother in my opinion too. Ironically, the leaf springs do actually increase the tactility on the upstroke, presumably because of the shape of the pip and the slider. Maybe that's what they were trying to say on their website. Our switches are extra tactile on the upstroke because of the clicker. Whatever, man, to me it's just their usual marketing bullshit. Now, if you're wondering how the sound of the Razer leaf springs compares to that of Alps switches, the Razers are considerably more high-pitched than Alps. And this is because although Razers also use a leaf spring clicker, it's first of all a lot smaller than the Alps leaves, and second, it uses only this arm bit to slam, while Alps leaves use the fat backside. Just as with the key feel, the sound is also inconsistent, but at least it's sharp, and in fact it's not even that loud. Listen to this comparison with MX Blues. I'd say that although MX Blues feel better, the Ornata does make a better sound. When the switches work, I mean. The keycaps are pretty shitty. They're thin, flat, laser-ablated caps and they use plunger stems, so the light distribution through the lettering is suboptimal. I'm really not sure why they didn't go with full-profile, nicely sculpted caps rather than these flat laptop-style pieces of shit, especially considering this keyboard isn't a laptop. Maybe the lighting didn't reach all the way or something. On their website, they say that they made the keycaps a shorter height to make it actuate faster, but that's just about the biggest load of bollocks I've ever heard in my life. I mean, even for Razer, that's a low point, and with the amount of marketing bullshit they put out, that's saying something. So why, if I piled some stuff on the caps, would that make it actuate slower then, or what? And if I shaved the top off, they'd actuate faster? I mean, it just defies all sense. What irredeemable anus came up with that one? One thing I'll give them though, at least the caps use a normal font, in contrast to the Black Widow, which uses a font so hideous that it makes my skin crawl. The Ornata itself is quite a minger though. In fact, I think it looks very cheap and unattractive, much like a roadside prostitute. As is often the case with membrane-based backlit keyboards, there's a lot of light bleed from these transparent sections under the keycaps, which again makes it look like very little attention was paid to it. You can see this especially well when I turn on the lighting for just one key. It just looks like one giant light blob rather than a defined single lit key. Also, it just feels really cheap and plasticky. It weighs only 840 grams and it flexes like hell. I mean, look at this, it's a fucking wet newspaper. It has less firmness than the tits on a 90-year-old. It uses flip-out feet, of course, but the keyboard is so incredibly unstable, it's like one of them is a peg leg or something. If you fully extend both of them, like this, look how much the keyboard tips back and forth. And if that looks like it would drive you absolutely up the wall, you're right on point. It's fucking madness inspiring. I can feel the shadows closing in on me when I use this keyboard. Now, believe it or not, but as it turns out, you can actually bend this keyboard out of shape by typing on it, and you can actually bend it back by twisting it a bit. Seriously, what is this? I've never seen anything like this in my life. Even this HP rectal cum whale of a keyboard doesn't do that. Also, that flexing demonstration from earlier on seems to have disabled the red LEDs on part of the keyboard. Great. Anyway, back to Razer marketing bullshit for a moment. On the website it claims to have 10-key rollover. Now at first I was thinking, 10-key rollover, they speak in farts and out of their arseholes, it's a membrane keyboard. But then I tested it and I honestly couldn't make it dip below 6 key rollover. So don't worry, it's still wrong being 6 key rollover rather than 10 key rollover, presumably because of the USB interface, but I was still surprised it was anything above 2. When I later took it apart for examination, which, by the way, requires removing a whole bunch of screws that are hidden under things that you can't put back properly, I found out why. It looks like it uses individual traces for each key rather than a matrix. I think that apart from using trace diodes, this is the only way to get genuine greater than 2 key rollover out of a membrane keyboard, and it's not a common approach. The keyboard also comes with a wrist rest, which is quite soft when you press it like this, but it has a hideous texture, which, again, I can actually audibly demonstrate by rubbing my fingers on it like this. As soon as I touch it, it makes my skin crawl. It's like you're touching a wine glass that's just come out of the dishwasher, you know, or the equivalent of feeling chalk on a blackboard. It's horrible. Interestingly, the wrist rest is standalone, but it snaps to the keyboard using magnets, as the bottom of the keyboard is magnetized. The keyboard costs about $100 to $110, which is about $50 cheaper than a Black Widow, but I really don't see where the money is going, to be honest. I mean, it's a damn rubber dome over membrane keyboard with surface mount LEDs, neither of which cost a damn to make. And well, let's be kind, non-existent build quality can't exactly be blamed for the price either. Overall, I really wouldn't recommend it, as it just feels like an extremely cheaply put together cash grab, thinly disguised as a genuinely mechanical keyboard with a clicker in there, which turns out to be all but irrelevant. Sure, it's quite tactile, and the noise is a little bit better than MX Blue, but the key feel is not. The marketing is vomited up manure, as per usual, and the build quality clubs baby pandas to death. I mean, as my long-term viewers will know, I have absolutely no rubber dome snobbery, and I can appreciate a good rubber dome keyboard if done well. And honestly, these domes don't feel half bad if you overlook their inconsistencies for a moment. But the way they market it as having a crisp tactile click and price it at $110 just smacks of a misleading ripoff, especially if you know you can buy 3 keyboards shipped with actual discrete switches for the same price. You know, if they really wanted to try something interesting with leaf springs, why not take an Alps leaf and stick it in a Cherry MX housing, for example, and who knows, they might end up with something genuinely interesting. But this is really just a rubber dome keyboard with some click leaves up its butt, and though tactile, it's too mushy and inconsistent for me to really enjoy, or say that this is the way forward. That's it for this review. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. And following is a typing demonstration of me typing on this keyboard.